Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Bestseller Live. I am your host, Cynthia Johnson, and I am here today with two incredible authors of the book, The Science of Leadership, 9 Ways to Expand Your Impact. I am so thrilled to welcome Jeffrey Hull and Margaret Moore, who wrote this book together. It's not out yet, but it is coming out very soon, July 15th of this year. In a world where leadership is less about command and more about connection, The Science of Leadership offers a fresh research-driven guide for making meaningful impact. Welcome, Jeffrey and Margaret. How are you?
Oh, thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for having us, and we're delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's great to be here with you.
I really love your title because I feel like it speaks to leaders. They're like, tell me how to do it, please. Not I want to know that there's a formula. So tell me a little bit about how you two came together to write the book.
Wow. Well, that goes back a ways. So we would date ourselves and we'd go all the way back. But Margaret and I met in 2012, I think, over dinner near Boston. And she was one of the co-founders of the Institute of Coaching. And I was enthralled with the idea of bringing credibility through science to the coaching profession, which was at that time still becoming a profession, I think it's safe to say. I was a psychologist turned coach. And I became a volunteer with the Institute of Coaching, and the rest is history. I mean, I wound up working together as part of the leadership of the Institute and have had years together working on bringing science as an underpinning to coaching and leadership. And that led to conversations. I'll let Margaret share with you a little bit about how the book got created, but we've been friends and colleagues for over a decade.
Oh, yeah, Margaret, I'd love to hear.
You want me to keep going? So
You can tell the book story
yeah,
for a little bit of it.
Actually, the book, the title wasn't going to be The Science of Leadership. But when we did a survey, I mean, it's interesting because you said, you think this title will speak to people, because it does speak to some and it doesn't speak to others who see leadership more as an art than a science. I mean, I'm a biologist and an MBA. I came out of, my two husbands, not at the same time, have been scientists. I worked in biotechnology for 17 years, managing R&D, most of it, managing scientists. So I have been surrounded by scientists for almost all my career. And so when I started in coaching in 2000, and started a first school of coaching in the healthcare space, there was no science for coaching. There were a few of us at about the same time. So anyway, we've both been, we use science liberally. In every coaching session and everything we do, we think of a piece of research that's relevant in this moment. So we're wired that way. But we didn't tackle the book to become The Science of Leadership because we were going to call it this self-transforming leader, because in the end we made the case for the science of being about self-transformation and transforming others and systems, but because it's a tall order, because we're not leadership researchers, so it wasn't obvious like we would put ourselves out there as having done the work to be able to call this that book. But when we did a survey of hundreds of folks, there were 10 surveys, 10 titles. And our editor threw in The Science of Leadership. We didn't. And that was preferred by 67% of the people who answered the survey. And so he said, you guys just got to do it, And so we still weren't sure. But anyway, we really leaned in to cover the waterfront. We worked really hard to read a lot. I mean, we'd read a lot of papers, but to read across the whole area. And there are some very good reviews of all the leadership topics. And right now there's a lot of analyses of many studies. So those are called I don't know how much you know about meta-analyses and systematic reviews, but quality of science starts with, defining something, then then measuring it, and then doing interventions and showing you can improve it. And then that's all divided into many, many topics. But now these topics have analyses of hundreds of studies. So humility has a study of 100 studies. So servant leadership has 200 plus studies, blah, 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 lots and lots of reviews of lots of studies. So right at this moment, there's a lot of research that shows what the signals are through the noise. So it was a very good time to do this and to distill it down to become, the elemental truths about what makes up good, effective leadership.
And to try to make it practically applicable, because I think the key thing from our standpoint as coaches was recognizing that the leaders we work with don't have the time, they don't have the energy, they don't have the bandwidth, and in many cases, not even the interest really to do the deep dive into the research. So we would do it for them. And that is what we've been doing for years as coaches. It was the reason I was drawn to the Institute of Coaching, affiliated with Harvard in the first place, was to bring scientific credibility to coaching. And so we're kind of doing the same thing for leadership, which is to bring some of this great research that Margaret's speaking to in a way that's accessible, practical, has kind of a coaching framing, because we're coaches, so that when people read this book, they are getting the real underpinnings, the scientific underpinnings, as Margaret said, that we went over, hundreds of research studies, but we distilled it into a journey that's actually very human. Like, how do you develop yourself as a leader in today's world is a very practical question. So the science is there to support that, but we really wanted to also have kind of a coaching lens. All right, Dr. Hull and Dr. Moore, I'm a leader. It's great that you get all this science, but what do I do, right? How do I actually put it into practice in the organization where I'm working if I don't have time to read 15,000 studies? And that was kind of in the back of our minds the whole time that we wrote this book. And hopefully it is going to be very accessible for what we call the everyday leader, who's actually out there doing the best they can, in many cases with limited information.
I think that limited information is such a great word, a great sentence, because when I heard science, I heard inclusion. I mean, that you had done the work to read all the studies and that you had a multiple perspective sort of
right
lens as you were writing in. So, but I also understand what you're saying about the transformation piece. Really, it might be about timing, though. Like the scientific approach to leadership right now maybe could be more interesting than it was 5 years ago or will be in 5 years from now. Are you feeling that?
Yeah, I mean, Cynthia, you're really the first person, and we've been speaking to many, that's really picked up on that as a important contribution, and hopefully you are speaking to an interest. I mean, we're looking at a lot of leaders and saying, what are they doing, and where did they learn how to lead? And so I think there is, and most of the books are written. They're pieces, and there's usually research to support them if they're written by folks who are reading the papers, but they're their particular favorite topic. They're not trying to, and obviously we did not cover every single thing. That's not possible either, but to give it enough. I think what we've done, so when I went to MBA school, there was no science of leadership 40 years ago. So that's, and I thought and strategy was leadership, and there just wasn't any. So 40 years later, there are really fundamentals that come out. It's like sort of, leadership 101. There's no place to go for a course for if you're a leader down the street in the, on your local shop front or, running a bank or whatever. There's really no standard curriculum, that says these are the fundamentals. And so that's what's timeless about it. And I think people are looking for something more substantial. So I hope you're right that this is the moment when people say, yeah, that actually is something I'd like to know about and understand.
Yeah, I think that it's also become almost a cliche that a lot of the so-called best known, I won't say bestseller, but best known books about leadership are written by the well-known CEOs telling their story. And they're valuable. I mean, it's great to learn about Jeff Bezos' story or Steve Jobs' story or any of those others that have made it, been entrepreneurs, been super successful. I mean, those are great stories, they're very valuable, but it doesn't actually give you tips that are based on evidence of research of what to actually do. It's more like they were born into it, or they woke up one day with an entrepreneurial idea and they just carried it through. As I said, no criticism of those stories, but what we wanted to do, as Margaret said, was sort of recognize that there is actually solid evidence available, very hard to discern where to go to find it, and time consuming to digest it, but it is there now. There has been a lot of study of leadership all over the world. In fact, I think in our book, Margaret, you can correct me, I think we have research studies summarized from like 22 different countries. So it's not just Western either. And then the core themes that we tried to pull out and put into sort of a journey of personal development are based on takeaways from this research. So yes, it has stories. We put in a number of stories of real leaders because we wanted it, as I said, to be practical, but it's not the hero leader. It's not the heroic leader. Like you can wake up one day and be a billionaire. It's really, all right, I'm a regular person trying to succeed in a leadership dynamic that's very challenging. What are some of the key fundamentals that I need to have in my toolkit? And that's what we had in our minds, I think, as we were trying to put this together.
I like that you say that. And I know you're right about there's no natural born leaders, but if you were to just read, Steve Jobs' story, to be a leader means to be chaotic, get fired, then go be great somewhere else, and then, play this little song and dance with a massive company. We know that there's a rarity in this world. So why are there no natural born leaders? Can we still learn from those that may be deemed that?
I think it's the other way around. I would say that we are all natural born leaders. And that, in fact, what we tried to do in our book is point to what the fundamentals are that have been demonstrated through research that actually bring out the leadership in anyone who chooses to take on a leadership role. And it's not some kind of special trait that only a few special people are born with. It's actually a capacity, and we actually walk through 9 levels of capacities that can be developed. That's what coaching is for. And that's what you can do with this book, is actually say, oh, I could actually become a really good leader if I focus on these things.
So then for the sake of the science, and I would love to get into the 9 steps, to make sure I am saying this 9 ways. But first, how do you define leadership and how do you define impact?
Yeah, great points. And we use the science, not surprisingly. So there's a definition. There are many, many definitions, but we picked a recent one. We tried to do recent research, high quality research, and research that covered a lot of ground, not just little small studies here and there. So the study the study from just a year ago looked at lots and lots of definitions and distilled it down. And what it comes down to is that you are helping others motivate themselves to move forward and reach collective goals. And the leader's impact is through relationships. And the last thing is the measure of the leader's impact is not their performance, it's others' performance.
Right.
So that is a level of maturity that not everybody has. So for example, just jumping in, 2 important capacities are being authentic, which we simplified it, say you care, I care. Something's important to me. Okay. You think about authenticity as it being about the leader. I'm authentic, therefore people follow me and do good work. That's actually good for the leader's well-being. But what in fact delivers the followers, the workforce to perform well and the organization to reach its goals is that you care as the leader about what they care about. And what they care about, I mean, higher purpose stuff, good stuff, not low, not your lower self, your higher self values, what they care about, and that gets pulled together into a common purpose. So it isn't really about you. The same thing with humility. You can be arrogant and perform just as well as if you were humble. Okay, so humility is not about you. But if you're humble, others perform better. You're not surprised. You're not taking up space.
Yeah.
You're allowing them to shine, except in a crisis. And then the title of this new paper is Not the Time to Be Humble. Not the time to be humble is when people are unstable and worried and they need somebody to step up. So that's an example of what might not be obvious. I think people think authentic leaders get everybody to perform better and humble leader, but it's not as simple as that. And that's where the science helps you. And that may still not be the end of the story. There could be some new research that comes out in the next 5 years that adds more nuance to that. But that's where we're at today in our understanding. And that isn't necessarily obvious. So the real deal about leaders is not about us. It's about what the others do. That's the measure of our leadership. And that's really clear in the research. It's not about the leader's performance. It's about what others do and what you did that got them to perform. And that's a more mature place to be, right? Because if you're stressed and worried about yourself, you're not going to draw out the best in other people. You're not going to be compassionate because so it does require a certain amount of, growth to be able to put others first. You're still serving yourself. It's not that you don't. In fact, what's great about the collective research is that the leader still needs to take care of themselves and their own performance. It isn't that you put yourself out of the picture. It's just that you balance it really well so that you get your needs met. And you have to. Leadership is a lonely, hard place. You still have to take care of yourself. And other people want you to. But it's like, I think I like the 50-50 balance. Half of what you're concerned about is that the others are performing and you forget about yourself for a while.
Yeah, that's and we see that. It's like we feel it, but to know that the science supports it is really nice. Because if you have a very humble leader, but they're so stressed out, it's kind of overwhelming. And then is impact defined then?
Impact is others' performance. So
okay.
So there's lots of measures. So and the studies all measure different things. So organizational goals could be financial, it could be customer loyalty, it could be, the list goes on and on, this long. And then the individual performance could be productivity, could be innovation, could be well-being, it could be how a team does together. There isn't like just one set of simple outcomes because organizations are different. So there's sort of these groups of impacts that have to do with the organization doing well, and then these groups of impacts about the individual or the team. And that's so you're looking at the individual performance, the team, and the organization. And that's the proof that the leadership style, behavior, practice had an impact.
Okay, that is very clear, as I expected it to be from the two of you. So thank you for that. Let's dive into the 9 ways. How can we be?
Yeah, Jeff, why don't you take us through the first first, and then I'll do the first.
Well, Margaret already sort of laid out a bit of the overarching structure, which is that when you're starting on the journey toward having greater impact, you have to start with yourself, right? I mean, it's a journey of personal growth at the outset. And so the first part of the 9 is self-oriented, self-focused. Then you move into outer focus, where you're actually looking at your impact on others, which becomes part of the team dynamic. And then ultimately, if you become comfortable with that, then you're moving towards stepping back and thinking about the systems that you're impacting. And the system could be anything from multiple divisions or teams to an entire organization to community and beyond, right? So it really depends on the scope, but it becomes a systems level orientation. But you start with self, and our ground that we begin with is conscious leadership. Consciousness being seeing yourself clearly, like beginning to have a sense of, okay, who am I as a leader? What are my strengths? How do I operate? What are my patterns? And how do I become more objective about myself? What kind of feedback mechanisms am I using to get a sense of the sort of truth of me as a leader? And so we call it seeing yourself clearly, basically. And that involves becoming aware of your triggers, your shadows, the things that may trip you up along the way. And then moving, as Margaret pointed out, into authentic leadership, authenticity, because you begin to start to get in touch with your values. What's most important to me? Now that I have a sense of my strengths and myself, what do I value? And how do I bring my values into a conversation? And we move into the team dynamic where, as Margaret pointed out, what will become really important is the alignment between your own personal values as a leader and the values of others. And then from authentic, we moved into what we call agile leadership, which is the recognition that you need to be flexible because the situations that you're dealing with are constantly changing. And it's filled with your context as a leader, and in all of us actually in the world today, is completely replete with paradox, right? I mean, as leaders, we want highly productive, engaged workers, and then we want highly creative workers. Well, creativity and productivity are almost opposites. Because to be creative, you need to relax, you need to be able to breathe, you need to be able to be, allowing things to flow through you, sort of be in a state of flow, as the scientists would say. But that doesn't appear on the surface to be highly productive. So Agile requires you to become comfortable with those dichotomies, be able to move into situations. And we already spoke of one, when you need to be humble versus when you need to be dictating or directive. Those are also part of the paradoxes. So the first three layers of the system or the framework that we created start with how you as a leader show up, your authenticity, your agility, and your sense of self, your objective awareness of yourself. And then we move into the team. You want to take over, Margaret?
Yeah. So then the next level is others, and there are three. So just quickly, they're relational, positive, which is positive psychology, and compassion. There may be some researchers listening, and we did a fairly substantial reorganization of these constructs because there are frameworks. You'll recognize these frameworks, but we kind of dissolved them and found the essence of each one. And then so there's caring and values in 4 or 5 of them, and we kept it authentic and we took it out of servant and out of the way. So I just want to make that point. With relational, we stayed with relationships. There's other ways that's used, and that's very much coaching. It's empathy, it's listening, it's psychological safety, it's trust, and then it's helping people in the most meaningful ways. And it's more than connection. Work. We create some of our most, like Jeff and I, some of your most precious relationships are at work, and that's okay. They need to be mature so that you can put aside the care of their welfare from the objective work, and it takes a mature person. But relationships are what, the heart-centered collaboration is what produces better creativity and better collaboration. So you have to put your heart in your relationships. You can't just be all head seeing through people to the task. So that's the first thing. And people need good relationships at work. And then the second thing, positive psychology. So relational is helping, positive is strengthening. it's not just positive emotions, it's actually strengthening more confidence, more agency, more meaning, more optimism, and more positive experiences. So you're building psychological capital, so people are stronger, more confident, and more proactive. And then compassion is a new kid on the block, because you sort of think, well, why do we need compassion if you already have relational? But compassion and empathy are not the same. Empathy is attuning emotionally, which is kind of draining, because I'm kind of sharing how you feel in the moment, which you can kind of step into, but you have to pull back. Compassion is understanding the suffering and the perspectives. So, and across all of the players. So you can feel the hearts beating and the interests of everybody. And that compassion requires all of what we just said: being conscious, agile, caring. And it's the beginning of strategy, because you have to understand all the players at a human level, not just, even if it's the whales in the ocean and the trees and the river. You have to sense their presence and the need to bring them all together as a strategy. So compassion is when you start to broaden out from relationships and strengthening to resonating and creating a culture of the vision resonates, the purpose resonates, the relationships resonate. If somebody goes through a terrible tragedy, organizations come together and resonate with that. So it's a really interesting one. And maybe I'll turn it back to Jeff for the last three, which are the systems ones, if we still have time.
Yeah, we do. Please. I'm loving this going.
Well, I can maybe synopsize the three last levels quickly, so we can get into a dialogue with you while we have time. But as I said at the outset, the framework takes you from self to others into what we call a systems level. And at that point, you're shifting into some of the more known frameworks and some of the very well-studied frameworks, but they're the more sophisticated. So servant leadership, shared leadership, and transformational leadership. And then in many ways, they have overlaps, as Margaret said, but the fundamental theme is stepping back and looking at the organizational dynamic and how can you best serve the innovation, the performance, and the execution of the broader system, the team and the organization. And so if you're in a servant mindset, you're going to look for how you can support from behind, still being at the forefront when necessary, but empowering others so that you're not really sitting at the top of the mountain isolated. You're inclusive, you're respectful. And as Margaret said, the research shows that humility can actually be a really powerful tool at the right timing to give people that emphasis, to allow them to step up as leaders. And then sharing leadership is about actually turning it into a we conversation. Not just I as the leader, but we as the leadership. And how many people, how many of your team can you start to bring into that conversation? What does it take to bring others into the distributed or shared dynamic so that when a vision gets created, it's not just you as an individual coming up with a vision. It's a group effort. It's a shared experience. And as Margaret pointed out, that's where shared strategy becomes really powerful. And ultimately, transformational leadership, which is all of that with the added taste of courage and inspiration and vision, so that you're actually literally capable with others of transforming your service, your product, your organization to deal with the necessary resilience that you need to deal with today's disruptive environment. So I think the good news is when you get all the way to the transformational level, you're not doing it alone anymore. You're still paying attention to your own inner needs and taking care of yourself all the way back to conscious leadership. But you've actually created an environment that supports bringing a whole sort of cadre of others along with you and leading together. And, I would just end by saying, you mentioned Steve Jobs. I mean, these are great entrepreneurs that have have wonderful stories. But in many ways, I think we're not really trying to support the single one person leader type environment anymore. I think we're really trying to say, let's turn everyone into a leader and let's bring us all together to get the best out of the entire system.
Yes, first of all, yes, my career worked with leaders who were the founders and leaders who were not the founders, and there's a difference. The emotional
founders are great. I'm not trying to belittle the value of that.
The shared experience is easier when the person who created the thing is because they just have a different lens altogether. Not that they can't do it; it's just different. And you said psychological capital, and I know this will have to be the last question, but when you're talking about systems and safety and the collective versus a single leader mindset, it's let's make everyone a leader. Is that's psychological capital essentially, right?
Yeah. And we make the distinction that we didn't use the term human capital, which is a number 2 studied leadership topic, because we don't want people to see humans as capital. We want people to see humans as having capital. What you're getting at, what is hard about sharing and the system, is that you have to take the time to bridge the gap between the way your brain works, smart, agile, transformational thinking, and bring others, bridge the gap between you and them so that they become more transformational, they become stronger, they become so that's where coaching style fits in. And that is hard. We're not saying this is easy. If the thing about jobs and people like that who are the idols of transformational leaders is that they're not whole. They don't have most of the rest. And the opportunity is to have the brilliance of the founder, which we still need. You still need people seeing ahead of the curve and seeing ahead of everybody. We can't take that away. There still is the place for the hero. I'm not, I don't think we want to, but if the hero becomes more whole and brings other people in, so that all these other skills, you're going to end up building a group of transformational leaders. And that won't be everybody, but you won't get there, and you won't get the engagement. I mean, think about low engagement, right? This is the answer, is sharing leadership.
Right.
Because then people are engaged. I mean, if nobody's putting that together, we talk about well-being and, psychological safety, but the real deal is people want to be in the middle of things, contributing as best as they can. And that's harder than just transforming, alone and saying, here's where we're going, everybody follow. So I think we've gone beyond the science in terms of assembling these things in a sequence of increasing complexity in ways to challenge people to say, look, become whole. Don't just play to your strengths.
And bring others along.
Bring others along with you. And then you will be lighter load for you.
Right.
And better outcomes. And that's not widely appreciated. We still think you need, you see the examples that you still need the meanness, the selfishness, the sort of drivenness as to get to the heights of success. We're really here to say that that's the old model. The new model is wholeness to deliver even more transformation.
Oh, I love this. I love this. This is a different perspective, but with my daughter, right? If she helps me make dinner, she'll eat it.
It's sometimes just that simple, right?
It is true. It's the greatest lesson in life.
You're growing a little leader right there in your own home organization. I love that, because that's what you just did, is bring to this conversation what we tried to do in our book, which is, yes, these are complex subjects. Yes, we tried to distill from academic research, but at the end of the day, it's real life. And that's what we also tried to include. And that's, we were a little bit humbled by the idea of writing about the science of leadership, but because we're coaches. But to Margaret's point, it's about making it real. And it's just like what you just said, is like, let's make it real. Bring as many people into the conversation as possible. Let's get everyone cooking.
That would be a good thing too.
Yeah, everyone would love that. By the way, I think that's also proven somewhere in the science.
But you have to slow down, right?
I have to slow down. I also have to protect.
It's harder for you to do that.
You know, you create roadblocks. You know, she's obviously not working at the oven.
Yeah, exactly.
Still participating. She's not using a knife, but she's still yeah. So I think
there's a book in there, Cynthia. There's a book in there.
Yeah. Well, I'll be reaching out to both of you if there is. Thank you both so much. The book comes out on July 15th of this year, so very, very soon. Pre-sales are up and available at scienceofleadership.com. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Scienceofleadership.com. 9 ways to expand your impact. Dr. Hull, Dr. Moore. I'm sorry for not saying that earlier in the session.
I'm not a doctor, by the way.
I thought you said that earlier. I was like, how did I miss
Jeff promoted.
But I feel much better. I only get a half.
But she's much smarter than me, even if she's not.
Oh my goodness. No, this is a very joyful, exciting conversation. And I look forward to sharing the book with everyone. We'll put the book and where you can buy it, everything about Dr. Hull and Margaret Moore in the show notes. So yeah, thank you again. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Bestseller Live. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.